Captain Jake Morrison sat in the small waiting room backstage. His hands rested on his knees as he watched the screens showing the live broadcast. The studio lights were bright and the audience was laughing at something the host had just said. In 30 minutes, he would be out there talking to millions of people across the galaxy. Jake touched the chain around his neck through his uniform shirt. The metal felt warm against his fingers. It was his father's dog tag from the old Earth, military. His father had died 20 years ago in the Centauri Wars, but Jake still wore the tag every day. It made him feel like his dad was still with him somehow. The door opened and a young woman with a clipboard walked in. She had short red hair and wore a bright blue dress that seemed too fancy for backstage work. "Captain Morrison, I'm Lisa, the assistant producer. Rita is ready for you now," she said with a smile that seemed practiced. Jake stood up and straightened his dark blue uniform. The medals on his chest caught the light as he moved. He had earned each one the hard way, fighting, in battles that most people only read about in the news. "Is there anything I should know about the questions she'll ask?" Jake asked as they walked down a narrow hallway. Lisa laughed. "Oh, Rita likes to keep things interesting. Just be yourself and you'll do fine. The audience loves war heroes." They stopped at a doorway that led to the main studio. Jake could hear the host talking to the audience about their next guest. Her voice was loud and full of energy. "Ladies and gentlemen, beings of all species across our great galaxy, please welcome Captain Jake Morrison, hero of the Battle of Kepler Station." The audience clapped as Jake walked onto the stage. The lights were even brighter than they looked on the screens. He had to squint a little as he made his way to the guest chair next to the host's desk. Rita Williams was exactly what Jake had expected from watching her show. She was tall and thin, with dark skin and silver hair that was styled in a way that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Her dress was covered in tiny lights that changed colors as she moved. She stood up and shook Jake's hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Captain Morrison, welcome to Galaxy Talk. How does it feel to be the most famous human soldier in known space?" she asked as they both sat down. Jake smiled politely. "I'm just one of many brave people serving our colonies, Rita. I don't think of myself as famous." "Oh, come on now," Rita said with a laugh. "You saved an entire space station with just 12 men. The news feeds called it impossible. Even the alien military experts said humans couldn't pull off something like that." "We had good training and a little luck," Jake replied. He was used to these kinds of questions by now. Every interview was the same. People wanted to hear about the fighting and the explosions, but they never asked about the friends he had lost or the nightmares that still woke him up at night. Rita leaned forward in her chair. "Tell us about that final battle. When the enemy ships surrounded Kepler Station, what was going through your mind?" Jake took a breath and began telling the story he had told 100 times before. He talked about the enemy ships appearing out of nowhere. He explained how his small team had used the station's maintenance tunnels to get behind enemy lines. He described the final fight in the control room that decided the fate of 50,000 civilians. The audience listened carefully. Some of them had probably heard the story before, but they seemed interested anyway. Jake noticed that there were humans in the crowd, but also beings from other worlds. He saw the tall, blue-skinned people from Andromeda Prime and the short, furry creatures from the Vega system. "That's quite a story," Rita said when he finished. "And I understand you have something special that you carry with you into every battle." Jake's hand moved automatically to his chest where the dog tag lay hidden under his shirt. "I'm not sure what you mean." Rita smiled in a way that made Jake feel uncomfortable. "Our research team tells me you wear your father's old military tag. Is that right?" "Yes, I do," Jake said quietly. "Can we see it?" Rita asked. Her voice had changed somehow. It was still friendly, but there was something else there now. Something that reminded Jake of the way predators looked at their prey. Jake hesitated for a moment, then pulled the chain out from under his shirt. The dog tag was simple and old-fashioned. It was made of basic steel and had his father's name and service number stamped into it. To most people, it probably looked like junk. Rita looked at the tag and then at the audience. "Well, would you look at that, folks? In an age where we have quantum computers and faster-than-light travel, Our brave captain here carries around a piece of old metal for good luck." Some people in the audience laughed. Jake felt his face get hot. "I mean, I understand the sentiment," Rita continued. "But don't you think it's a little primitive? Here we are trying to prove that humans belong in the galactic community, and our heroes are walking around with what looks like jewelry from a museum." More laughter from the audience. Jake's grip on the dog tag tightened. "The other alien races must think we're still stuck in the Stone Age," Rita said, gesturing to the crowd. "I mean, what's next? Are we going to start wearing animal skins and painting our faces?" The laughter got louder. Jake could see some of the alien beings in the audience nodding along with Rita's jokes. His father's tag felt heavier in his hand. "Maybe it's time for humans to grow up a little," Rita said with a grin. "Leave the security blankets at home and start acting like a real spacefaring civilization." Jake stared at her for a long moment. The studio was still filled with laughter, but he barely heard it. All he could think about was his father's voice, telling him stories about the early days when humans first reached for the stars. He thought about all the people who had died to make those dreams come true. Rita was still smiling at him, waiting for his response. The cameras were focused on his face, broadcasting his reaction to millions of viewers across the galaxy. Jake said nothing. He just sat there holding his father's dog tag as the laughter slowly died away and the studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. The silence stretched across the studio like a heavy blanket. Jake Morrison sat perfectly still in his chair, his fingers wrapped around his father's dog tag. The metal felt warm in his palm, almost like it was alive. He could hear his own heartbeat, in his ears, loud and steady. Rita Williams shifted in her seat. Her smile was starting to look forced. She had expected Jake to laugh along with her joke or maybe make some comment about old traditions. She had not expected this complete silence. The cameras kept rolling, showing Jake's face to millions of viewers across the galaxy. In his mind, Jake was no longer sitting in the bright studio. He was 8 years old again, sitting on his father's lap in their small apartment on Mars Colony 7. His father was wearing his old Earth uniform, the same dog tag hanging around his neck. "Tell me about the early days again, Dad," young Jake had said. Lieutenant Commander Ben Morrison had smiled and touched the metal tag on his chest. "Back then, son, we didn't have much. No fancy ships like they have now. No energy shields or quantum computers. Just basic rockets and a lot of hope." "Were you scared?" Jake had asked. "Every day." His father had answered honestly. "Space was trying to kill us at every turn, but we kept going because we knew someone had to take the first steps. Someone had to push further out so that kids like you could have a better future." Jake remembered how his father's eyes had looked when he talked about those early missions. There was sadness there, but also pride. Pride in what humans had accomplished with so little. "This tag belonged to my friend Danny Chen," his father had explained, holding up the simple piece of metal. "He died when his ship lost power near Jupiter. Could have been saved if we had better technology back then. I wear this to remember him and all the others who didn't make it home." Now, sitting in the studio, Jake could almost hear his father's voice again. The tag in his hand seemed to pulse with warmth. Rita was starting to look worried. The audience was getting restless. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered something to their neighbor. "Captain Morrison?" Rita said, trying to get him to speak. "Are you okay?" Jake's eyes slowly focused on her face. She looked different now, less confident. The bright studio lights reflected off her silver hair, making her look older somehow. "You think it's funny?" Jake said quietly. His voice was so low that the microphones had to work to pick it up. "I'm sorry?" Rita leaned forward. "You think this is funny?" Jake repeated, a little louder this time. "This piece of old metal." Rita forced another smile. "Well, I just think that in today's modern galaxy, maybe we should focus on the future instead of clinging to the past." Jake stood up slowly. The dog tag swung from the chain in his hand, catching the studio lights. "You want to know about the past? Let me tell you about my father." The audience was completely quiet now. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Lieutenant Commander Ben Morrison joined the Earth Space Force when humans barely knew how to leave their own planet, Jake said. He flew in ships that were basically metal cans with engines attached. No life support systems like we have now. No emergency rescue beacons. If something went wrong, you died alone in the dark. Rita opened her mouth to say something, but Jake kept talking. My father's first mission was to escort a colony ship to Alpha Centauri. Took them 3 years to get there. 3 years in a cramped ship with recycled air and food that came in tubes. Half the colonists got sick. Some of them died. But they made it because people like my father were willing to risk everything for a chance at something better. Jake held up the dog tag so everyone in the studio could see it. This tag has been in space longer than most of the alien races have known humans exist. It's been to places where the gravity was so strong it could crush your bones. It survived solar flares that would cook modern ships. It's simple because it had to be. Everything humans built back then had to be simple and strong, because we couldn't afford for it to break. Some of the alien beings in the audience were leaning forward, in their seats listening carefully. Jake noticed a tall blue woman from Andromeda Prime nodding slightly. My father died defending a colony ship full of families. Jake continued. Women and children who were just trying to find a new home. The enemy had better weapons, faster ships, more advanced technology. But my father and his crew fought anyway because that's what humans do. We don't give up, even when the odds are against us. Rita was looking uncomfortable now. She glanced at her producers off stage, but they just shrugged. This was live television across the galaxy. They couldn't stop it now. This tag carries more than just my father's name and number, Jake said. It carries the memory of every human who died pushing further into space, every pilot who didn't come home, every engineer who stayed at their post when the ship was falling apart, every soldier who stood between the innocent and those who would hurt them. Jake's voice was getting stronger. The pain and anger he had felt when Rita made her joke was turning into something else. Something that felt like fire in his chest. You call it primitive, he said, looking directly at Rita. You call it a security blanket. But this piece of metal represents something your fancy technology can't replace. It represents the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. It represents the refusal to quit when things get hard. The studio was so quiet that Jake could hear the hum of the air recycling system. Rita was staring at him with wide eyes. She had started this as a joke, but it wasn't funny anymore. Every human soldier carries one of these, Jake said, holding the tag higher. Not because we're primitive, but because we remember. We remember the price that was paid for us to be here. We remember that freedom and safety aren't free. Someone always has to pay for them. He looked out at the audience, making eye contact with both humans and aliens. And when the time comes when someone needs to stand between the innocent and those who would hurt them, we'll be ready. Because we carry our dead with us. We carry their courage and their sacrifice. And we never, ever forget. Jake sat back, down in his chair, still holding the dog tag. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't uncomfortable now. It was respectful. Even Rita seemed to understand that something important had just happened. But Jake wasn't finished. Yet there was more to tell, much more. Jake Morrison looked down at the dog tag in his hand. The metal seemed to shimmer under the studio lights, almost like it was made of something more than simple steel. He had never told anyone the real truth about what he carried around his neck. Not his commanding officers, not his closest friends, not even his wife. But this isn't just a piece of metal, Jake said quietly. His voice carried clearly through the silent studio. It's not just a memory or a symbol. Rita Williams leaned forward in her chair. Something in Jake's tone had changed. The sadness and anger were still there, but now there was something else. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. What do you mean? She asked. Jake held the dog tag up to the light. As he turned it slowly, strange patterns seemed to move across its surface, patterns that looked almost like tiny circuits or writing in a language no one had ever seen before. 25 years ago, human scientists developed something new, Jake said. Something we never told the other races about. We learned how to compress massive amounts of data into quantum-level storage devices. Devices so small and simple that they could be hidden inside everyday objects. A murmur went through the studio audience. Several alien beings were sitting up straighter in their seats. Dr. Sarah Kim, the show's technology expert, was frantically tapping on her portable scanner from her seat in the front row. "You're saying that's some kind of computer?" Rita asked. "Not just any computer," Jake replied. "This dog tag contains the compressed consciousness fragments of 50,000 human soldiers who died in service to our colonies. Their memories, their experiences, their knowledge, all stored in quantum format inside what looks like a simple piece of metal." The murmur from the audience got louder. Dr. Kim was staring at her scanner with wide eyes. She looked up at the camera crew and nodded slowly. Her scanner was confirming what Jake had just said. "That's impossible," Rita said, but her voice sounded less sure than before. "The Galactic Council has the most advanced quantum technology in known space. If humans had developed something like that, we would know about it." Jake smiled for the first time since he had sat down. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a poker player gives when they're about to show a winning hand. "Would you?" he asked. "The Council thinks humans are a young race, primitive, good for manual labor and military service, but not capable of real scientific advancement. Isn't that what your research team told you about us?" Rita didn't answer, but her face said everything. That was exactly what her research team had told her. "Dr. Kim," Jake called out to the technology expert in the audience, "what is your scanner telling you about this dog tag?" Dr. Kim stood up slowly. She was a small woman with short black hair and thick glasses. She had been the Council's chief technology advisor for over a decade. Her voice shook a little when she spoke. "The quantum signature is incredible," she said. "I'm reading data compression levels that are at least 50 years ahead of our current technology. The storage capacity alone would require a facility the size of a small moon with our current methods." 50,000 consciousness fragments, Jake repeated. "Every human soldier who dies in service has their final moments, their knowledge, their tactical experience recorded and stored. We don't just remember our dead, we carry them with us, literally." The studio was buzzing now. Camera operators were zooming in on Jake's dog tag. Reporters in the audience were frantically typing on their communication devices. This was no longer just an interview. This was breaking news that would change everything. "But why hide it?" Rita asked. "Why keep this technology secret?" Jake's expression grew serious again. "Because 50 years ago, when humans first started exploring space, we learned something important. The galaxy is not a friendly place for weak races. Species that can't defend themselves get conquered or enslaved. We decided early on that it was better to be underestimated than to be seen as a threat." He stood up again, still holding the dog tag. "Every human colony looks primitive from the outside. Basic buildings, simple technology, no obvious defenses, but appearances can be deceiving. We learned to hide our real capabilities behind a mask of simplicity." Dr. Kim was still staring at her scanner. "Captain Morrison, if what you're saying is true, then humans have been deliberately appearing less advanced than they actually are." "For 50 years, Jake nodded. "While the Council debated whether to grant humans full membership, we were quietly developing technology that would make us one of the most advanced races in the galaxy. We just never advertised it." Rita was struggling to process what she was hearing. "You're saying that every human stereotype, the primitive weapons, the basic ships, the simple colonies, it's all been an act?" "Not an act," Jake corrected. "Camouflage. We use simple, reliable technology on the surface because it works and because it makes other races ignore us. But underneath, we've been building something much more sophisticated." He held up the dog tag again. "This contains the tactical knowledge of 50,000 military veterans, battle plans, weapon designs, strategic information. Everything we've learned about warfare and survival in space, and every human soldier carries one." The implications hit the audience like a wave. If what Jake was saying was true, then humans weren't the junior species they appeared to be. They were potentially one of the most dangerous races in the galaxy, and they had been hiding in plain sight. "How many humans know about this?" Dr. Kim asked. "Every human adult," Jake replied simply. "It's not a military secret. It's a cultural decision. We all agreed that it was better to be safe than sorry." "Rita, was staring at him with a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. "You've been lying to the entire galaxy for 50 years. Not lying," Jake said calmly. "Just not volunteering information. The Council never asked if we had advanced technology. They just assumed we didn't because we chose not to show it off." He tucked the dog tag back inside his shirt. But somehow it seemed different now. Not hidden, but protected. Like a weapon being kept ready for when it might be needed. "The question now," Jake said, looking directly into the main camera, "is what happens next. Do we continue to pretend we're primitive and harmless? Or is it time for humanity to show the galaxy what we've really been building all these years?" Studio fell silent again. But this time it wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that comes right before everything changes forever. Jake Morrison reached inside his shirt and pulled out the dog tag again. This time he did something different. He pressed his thumb against a small spot on the back of the tag that looked like a tiny scratch. The metal grew warm under his touch, and suddenly the air around him began to shimmer. "What are you doing?" Rita Williams asked, her voice tight with worry. "Something I was hoping I would never have to do," Jake replied quietly. "I'm activating the awakening protocol." The shimmering air began to take shape. Slowly, like fog forming into solid objects, human figures started to appear around the studio. They were translucent and glowed with a soft blue light, but they looked completely real. The audience gasped as more and more figures materialized. These were not random people. They wore military uniforms from different time periods in human history. Some had the simple green uniforms of Earth's early Space Force. Others wore the more advanced gear of recent colonial wars. All of them looked alert and ready, as if they had just stepped off a battlefield. One figure appeared directly next to Jake's chair. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and kind eyes. He wore the same uniform that Jake remembered from his childhood, complete with captain's stripes on his sleeves. "Hello, son," Lieutenant Commander Ben Morrison said, his voice echoing strangely in the studio. Jake's eyes filled with tears, but he kept his composure. "Hello, Dad." The studio erupted in chaos. People in the audience were pointing and shouting. Camera operators were frantically adjusting their equipment to capture the impossible scene. Rita Williams was pressed back in her chair, staring at the ghostly figures with her mouth open. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ben Morrison said, addressing the camera directly, "beings of all races across the galaxy, my name is Lieutenant Commander Ben Morrison, and I died 20 years ago defending civilian transport ships near the Kepler system." His voice was calm and professional, the voice of someone used to giving important briefings. The chaos in the studio died down as people realized he was speaking to them. "I am speaking to you now through quantum consciousness technology that your scientists told you was impossible," Ben continued. "Along with me are 49,999 other human soldiers who gave their lives in service to our colonies and our ideals." More figures stepped forward from the crowd of spirits. There was a young woman with lieutenant's bars on her collar, an older man with sergeant's stripes, a pilot still wearing her flight helmet. Each one looked as real and solid as any living person. "We are not ghosts," said the young lieutenant. Her name tag read, Jones. "We are consciousness fragments stored, in quantum format, activated only in times of great need. Our memories, our knowledge, and our tactical experience have been preserved so that humanity would never truly lose the lessons we learned." Dr. Kim was frantically scanning the figures with her equipment. "Impossible," she whispered, loud enough for her microphone to pick up. "The energy signatures are consistent with living beings, but the quantum structure is completely artificial. This is technology we don't even have theories for." Sergeant Martinez, an older man with scars on his face, stepped forward. "Dr. Kim, your people have been studying quantum consciousness for 200 years. You've made significant progress, but you've been approaching it from the wrong direction. You've been trying to copy consciousness. We learned how to compress and preserve it." "But how?" Dr. Kim asked, standing up from her seat. "The computational requirements alone would be staggering. You would need processing power equivalent to a star." Lieutenant Jones smiled. "Who says we don't have it?" The implications of her words hit the audience like a physical blow. If humans had developed quantum consciousness technology, what else had they been hiding? Rita Williams finally found her voice again. This is all very impressive, but what does it mean? Why are you showing us this now? Ben Morrison looked at his son, then back at the camera. For 50 years, humanity has been content to let other races think we were primitive and harmless. We built our colonies. We served in your militaries. We did the jobs that others considered beneath them. We were polite guests in a galaxy that barely tolerated our presence. But guests can become hosts, added another spirit, a woman with commander's stripes. And hosts set the rules. Jake stood up from his chair, the dog tag still glowing in his hand. Every human adult carries one of these, he said. Not just soldiers, civilians, colonists, engineers, scientists. We all carry the accumulated knowledge and experience of our people. That's millions of consciousness fragments, Dr. Kim said, her voice barely above a whisper. 57,432,819, to be exact, said Ben Morrison. The combined knowledge and experience of every human who has ever contributed something significant to our civilization. The studio was completely silent except for the quiet hum of the cameras. The alien beings in the audience were staring at the ghostly figures with expressions ranging from awe to fear. You're saying that every human is connected to this network? Rita asked. Not connected, Jake corrected. Enhanced. Each tag contains different consciousness fragments, but they can all communicate with each other when activated. It's like having access to the greatest library in human history, except the books can talk back and give advice. Lieutenant Jones nodded. When your Captain Morrison faced impossible odds at Kepler Station, he wasn't fighting alone. He had access to the tactical knowledge of every human military commander who had ever lived. That's how 12 people defeated a force of 300. We don't just remember our heroes, added Sergeant Martinez. We carry them with us into every battle, every challenge, every moment when courage is needed. Ben Morrison looked directly at Rita Williams. You mocked my son for carrying a piece of old metal. You called it primitive and suggested that humans needed to grow up. But what you were really mocking was the collective wisdom and sacrifice of our entire species. Rita's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The question now, Ben Morrison continued, is what happens next. For 50 years, we have been content to be underestimated. We have let other races think they were superior, while we quietly built something they never imagined possible. Jake looked out at the audience, then directly into the main camera. The age of human underestimation is over. The galaxy is about to discover what we've really been building while everyone was laughing at our simple ways. The ghostly figures around the studio began to fade, but their voices remained clear. Prepare yourselves, they said in unison. Humanity is no longer asking for permission. The ghostly figures in the studio were beginning to fade, but Lieutenant Commander Ben Morrison stepped forward one more time. His translucent form flickered like a candle in the wind, but his voice remained strong and clear. There's something else you need to know, he said, looking directly at the main camera. The consciousness technology is just one part of what humanity has been building. Jake, show them the fleet. Jake Morrison pulled a small device from his pocket. It looked like an ordinary communication pad, the kind that millions of people across the galaxy used every day. But when he pressed a series of buttons on its surface, something extraordinary happened. Every screen in the studio suddenly changed. The normal broadcast feed was replaced by images from space. Dozens of them, then hundreds. The screens showed what looked like ordinary human ships, cargo haulers, mining vessels, research stations, and colony transports scattered throughout human space. These are live feeds from human territory, Jake explained to the stunned audience. What you're seeing are ships and stations that the Galactic Council has registered as civilian operations. Mining companies, shipping businesses, scientific research projects. Rita Williams stared at the screens. They look normal to me. Basic, human technology, just like everyone expects. Jake smiled. Watch closely. He pressed another button on his device. Suddenly, the ships on the screens began to change. What had looked like simple cargo haulers started shedding their outer hulls, like snakes shedding skin. Underneath the plain metal exterior were sleek, advanced warships with weapon systems that looked nothing like anything the galaxy had ever seen. Mining stations revealed themselves to be massive defensive platforms bristling with energy cannons and shield generators. Research ships transformed into fast attack vessels with drive systems that bent space around them like liquid. The audience in the studio sat in shocked silence as ship after ship revealed its true nature. What had appeared to be a scattered collection of peaceful civilian vessels was actually the largest and most advanced military fleet in known space. "How many ships?" Dr. Kim asked in a whisper. 47,812 combat vessels, answered the fading spirit of Lieutenant Jones, plus another 23,000 support craft, mobile bases, and deep space platforms. "That's impossible," Rita said, but her voice lacked conviction. She had said that word too many times today, and each time had been proven wrong. "The Galactic Council's combined fleet numbers about 15,000 ships," Jake said calmly, "and most of those are older designs using technology that we helped develop 20 years ago." Commander Sarah Blake, another spirit wearing the uniform of the Human Space Navy, stepped forward. "Every human colony has been built according to a master defense plan. What look like simple settlements are actually fortress worlds with underground facilities that can produce ships, weapons, and supplies for extended conflicts." The screens now showed images from human colonies, pleasant-looking towns and cities with basic buildings and simple infrastructure. But as hidden panels slid away and concealed entrances opened, massive underground complexes were revealed. Factories, shipyards, and military bases that had been completely invisible from the surface. "The colony on New Terra that the Council thinks has 50,000 farmers?" Commander Blake continued. "It actually has a population of 2 million, with most of them living and working in underground cities. The farms on the surface are real, but they're also camouflage for one of the largest military production facilities in the galaxy." Dr. Kim was frantically taking readings with her scanner, trying to confirm what she was seeing. "The energy signatures from these facilities, they're massive. How did we never detect them?" "Because you weren't looking for them," said Sergeant Martinez. "You saw what you expected to see, simple human settlements struggling to survive on frontier worlds. You never imagined that we might be building an entire civilization underground." Jake touched his communication device again, and the images on the screens changed once more. Now they showed human ships moving through space in ways that should have been impossible. Ships that disappeared and reappeared instantly in different locations, vessels that seemed to bend space around them, traveling faster than anything the galaxy had ever achieved. "Quantum tunneling drives," Jake explained. "We've been testing them for 15 years. Our ships can travel from one end of human space to the other in minutes instead of weeks." "But the physics," Dr. Kim started to say. "The physics work fine when you approach them from the right direction," interrupted Commander Blake. "Your scientists have been trying to fold space. We learned how to tunnel through it instead." Rita Williams looked like she was having trouble breathing. The scope of what she was learning was overwhelming. "You're saying that humanity has been building a secret empire for 50 years? "Not an empire," Jake corrected. "A civilization. We didn't want to conquer anyone. We just wanted to make sure that no one could conquer us." The ghostly figure of Ben Morrison nodded. "We remembered what happened to species that couldn't defend themselves. The Altarians were enslaved by the Vegan Empire. The Centauri Republic was absorbed by the Andromedan Collective. Dozens of races have been wiped out or subjugated because they trusted others to protect them. So we protected ourselves," added Lieutenant Jones. "We built our strength in secret, made ourselves look harmless, and waited." "Waited for what?" Rita asked. "For a moment like this," Jake said. "A moment when the galaxy would need to understand that humanity is no longer the weak junior partner they thought we were." The screens changed again, showing human ships beginning to move throughout the galaxy. Not attacking, but positioning themselves. Taking up stations near important trade routes, military bases, and population centers. "What are you doing?" Dr. Kim asked, her voice tight with concern. "We're revealing ourselves," Jake replied. "For 50 years we've hidden our true capabilities, but hiding is no longer necessary. The galaxy is about to learn that humanity has grown up. Commander Blake's fading form looked directly at the camera. To all the races watching this broadcast, understand this clearly. Humanity does not seek war. We do not want to conquer or destroy. But we will no longer pretend to be weak. We will no longer accept being treated as inferior. The age of humility is over, added Ben Morrison. We tried being polite guests in your galaxy. Now it's time for us to be equal partners, whether you like it or not. Jake stood up and looked directly into the main camera. Every human colony, every human ship, every human citizen is now operating under new protocols. We are no longer hiding what we are or what we can do. The ghostly figures were almost completely faded now, but their final words echoed clearly through the studio. The galaxy has a choice to make: accept humanity as equals, or discover why that would be the wiser option. And with that, they were gone, leaving only Jake Morrison standing in a studio that would never be the same again. The studio was completely silent after the ghostly figures disappeared. Jake Morrison stood alone next to his chair, the dog tag still hanging from his hand. The screens around the studio continued to show images of human ships revealing their true nature across the galaxy. Rita Williams sat frozen in her chair, staring at Jake like she was seeing him for the first time. Suddenly, every communication device in the studio began buzzing at once. Emergency alerts were flooding in from government officials, military, commanders, and news agencies across the galaxy. The biggest story in galactic history was unfolding live on television, and everyone was scrambling to understand what it meant. "Captain Morrison," Rita said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" Jake looked at her calmly. "I've told the truth. For the first time in 50 years, humanity is being completely honest about what we are and what we're capable of." A young assistant producer ran onto the stage, ignoring the live cameras. He whispered something urgent in Rita's ear. Her face went even paler than before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rita said, turning to address the camera, "we're receiving reports that the Galactic Council has called an emergency session. Military forces from 12 different races are mobilizing. This is unprecedented." Jake nodded. "They're scared. For 50 years, they've thought they understood the balance of power in the galaxy. Now they're realizing that everything they believed was wrong." Dr. Kim stood up from her seat in the audience. "Captain Morrison, are you declaring war on the galaxy?" "No, Dr. Kim. We're declaring peace." "Peace?" Rita asked, confused. Jake smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had shown since sitting down. "Peace through strength. For 50 years, humanity has been the galaxy's servants. We did the dangerous jobs, fought the difficult wars, built the colonies that no one else wanted. We were grateful for any scraps of respect or recognition that other races threw our way." He held up the dog tag again. "But my father and 50,000 other soldiers didn't die so that humanity could remain on its knees forever. They died so that one day, we could stand as equals among the stars." The screens around the studio changed again. Now they showed human ambassadors walking into government buildings on dozens of different worlds. The ambassadors looked the same as always: polite, professional, unremarkable. But everyone watching knew that they represented something completely different now. "At this very moment," Jake continued, "human representatives are delivering the same message to every major government in the galaxy. Humanity is withdrawing from all military alliances and defense agreements that place us in subordinate positions." Rita's eyes widened. "You're abandoning your allies?" "We're renegotiating our relationships as equals," Jake corrected. "Any race that wants humanity as an ally will treat us as partners, not servants. Any race that wants to continue the old arrangement will find that option is no longer available." Another assistant rushed onto the stage with a tablet. Rita glanced at it and her face went white. "We're receiving word that human military forces are withdrawing from the Kepler Defense Zone, the Vegan Border Patrol, and the Andromedan Peace Fleet. 15 different conflicts are about to lose their primary military support. Those conflicts were never our responsibility in the first place," Jake said. "We volunteered to help because we believed in justice and protecting the innocent. We still believe in those things, but from now on we'll decide when and how to." Help, not wait to be told what to do. Dr. Kim was shaking her head in disbelief. The economic implications alone. Human colonies produce 40% of the galaxy's food, 60% of the raw materials for ship construction, and 80% of the skilled labor for dangerous operations. If you withdraw that support, the galaxy will have to learn to do those things for itself, Jake finished. Or it will have to negotiate fair trade agreements with humanity instead of expecting us to work for whatever wages other races decide we deserve. The screens showed human cargo ships changing course throughout the galaxy. Supply convoys that had been heading to alien worlds were turning around and returning to human space. Mining operations that had been shipping resources at below-market prices were shutting down their export operations. "This is economic warfare," Rita said, her voice rising. "This is business," Jake replied calmly. "For 50 years, humanity has been subsidizing the galaxy's economy with cheap labor and resources. We've been so grateful to be included that we never demanded fair compensation for our contributions. That era is over." A new set of images appeared on the screens. Human colonies that had looked poor and struggling were revealing their true prosperity. Underground cities with millions of inhabitants. Massive industrial complexes that could build anything from starships to quantum computers. Agricultural systems that could feed half the galaxy if necessary. "We were never the struggling junior race that everyone thought we were," Jake explained. "We just chose to live simply on the surface while building something magnificent underground. We saved our resources instead of spending them on display. We invested in our future instead of trying to impress our neighbors." Rita looked around the studio desperately. "Someone has to stop this. The council, the military forces, someone." "Stop what?" Jake asked. "Stop humanity from being honest? Stop us from demanding fair treatment? Stop us from refusing to be second-class citizens in our own galaxy?" He tucked the dog tag back inside his shirt, but now everyone knew what it really represented. Not just a memory, but a connection to the greatest technological and cultural achievement in human history. "There's something else you should know," Jake said, looking directly into the main camera. "Every human adult has been voting on this decision for the past 20 years. Every colony, every ship, every family has had a say in when and how we would reveal ourselves. This isn't the decision of a few leaders or military commanders. This is the will of our entire species." The screens showed voting results from human colonies across the galaxy. 97% in favor of revealing humanity's true capabilities. 94% in favor of demanding equal treatment. 89% in favor of withdrawing from subordinate military and economic relationships. "You've been planning this for decades," Dr. Kim said. "We've been preparing for it since the day we first left Earth," Jake replied. "We always knew that eventually we would have to choose between remaining servants or becoming equals. Today, we chose equality." Rita Williams looked directly at Jake, and for the first time since the interview began, there was respect in her eyes instead of mockery. "What happens now?" Jake stood up and straightened his uniform one final time. "Now the galaxy decides how it wants to respond. They can accept humanity as equal partners and work with us to build a better future for everyone. Or they can try to force us back into our old role and discover why that would be a very poor decision." He walked toward the exit, then stopped and turned back to the camera. "To every human watching this broadcast, know that your voices have been heard. To every other being in the galaxy, know that humanity extends its hand in friendship, but we will never again bow our heads in submission." Jake Morrison walked off the stage, leaving behind a galaxy that would never be the same. The age of human humility was over. The age of human equality had begun.